There are random philosophical facts dropped in the novel that are really good but make absolutely zero sense in the context of the book. It's like if Taylor Swift's discography was a novel. I bet this book goes so hard if you're stupid as fuck. Hello, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, I'm Zulkef and you're watching Zulkef Plus, where we talk about literature with love, rage, and at least one identity crisis per video. Today we are going to be talking about romance, not the act itself. This isn't Bridgerton, and no one's getting railed in a gazebo. We are talking about the genre. Romance is a literary hydra. It exists in every culture, every language, every Wattpad fic written in 2012 at 3 a.m. when you thought that One Direction was going to last forever. If you've ever stayed up late reading a fanfic under your covers, congrats, you've already got the spirit. If you're a reader, you've definitely brushed against romance, be it your literary fiction or your fantasy trilogies, or in the dark corner of AO3 that you swore that you would never revisit. Now, despite the title of this video, this is not a do this, don't do that writing essay.
Wait, what?
I'm not here with a chalkboard yelling at you that your enemies to lovers are not enemies enough if at least they are not mildly plotting each other's deaths. This isn't a masterclass with Sally Rooney, this is a vibe check. Today I want to talk about two novels that I read back to back a while ago. Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Black and As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow by Zulfa Katu. Now you might be thinking, girl, are you okay? What does a Syrian war trauma novel have in common with metaphysical time-looping art boy spiral? And to that, I have to say, more than it should. Which is concerning in the way watching The Notebook at the age of 13 is concerning, or how Joe Goldberg has a fan base. These books are on the opposite ends of Goodreads aesthetic boards, and yet, here we are. Now, let's get to the meat of this video, the novels. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow is set in a war-torn Syria. We follow our main protagonist Salma, who is a pharmacy student. She's turned into a hospital volunteer, trying to survive the daily horrors of Syrian civil war. She sees death constantly and helps the injured while also seeing a hallucinated version of her fear that we know as Khauf. Mind you, Khauf literally translates to fear. And I will get back to the lack of creativity in this novel later. There's a lot to unpack here. Poor attempts at depicting trauma, and the kind of ill-informed political takes that happen when you grow up as a diaspora kid whose only access to homeland news is CNN, Twitter threads, and one rogue Vice documentary. And of course, the highlight of today's video, the romance that nobody asked for.
Okay. Whatever that means.
A boy named Keenan with a motorcycle and really good hair enters the picture, and suddenly the revolution is a little bit complicated. Salma's inner monologue goes from how do I help these people to how do I look more cute in front of Keenan. Think of any young adult novel from the 2010s era and put a war in the background, and there you have it, As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. And yes, lemons are really that irrelevant in the story, and I don't think we have any mention of any lemons past the first few chapters. Now let's talk about Alone with You in the Ether by Olivia Blake. This one is set thousands of leagues away in Chicago and is about a girl named Reagan, a chronically impulsive artist with court-mandated therapy. And we have our male lead named Aldo, who is a theoretical math professor with obsessive thoughts and an intense fear of time. Like, I wouldn't be surprised if he scheduled his breakdowns over Google Calendar. They meet, they talk, and they talk a lot, and by a lot I mean absolute bonkers amount of yapping. And of course they spiral together, emotionally, existentially, and romantically. This book is like 90% unfiltered conversations and 10% mental illness in love. This is a genre-bending novel, a failed attempt at literary fiction that absolutely nailed its cringe. It's like the literary equivalent of a Tumblr quote set on a Bon Iver song. This is how you look camp right in the eye. Think of normal people if Marianne and Connell were both academically unwell and talked a lot. This book is spread across 6 conversations that the main characters have with each other. However, there's a lot more dialogue in the book and other things that the characters have going on in their individual lives. Though I gave this book 4 stars, I do understand how objectively bad the writing of this book is. This book tries too hard to be profound, but somehow none of that got in the way of me having a somewhat enjoyable experience. We'll get back to that later in the video. These two novels are wildly different from each other in terms of tone, stakes, and setting. One has airstrikes while the other one has metaphysics. One has trauma hallucinations while the other... What does the other have? Well, the other has Aldo, which can mean anything from daddy to a walking existential crisis. It honestly depends on who's reading the novel. Now, Alone with You in the Ether says it's a love story on the cover, though I do disagree with that. It could be that it was written on the cover ironically, but I haven't seen enough people talk about it. Alone with You in the Ether is like a character study for me. The author added a note at the end of the novel explaining her motives behind writing the novel and really helps you understand the book a bit better. Olivia Blake wanted to explore her lived experiences with mental illness, and that is quite what the novel really is. Meanwhile, As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, oh my god, where do I even begin? This novel is like the literary equivalent of all of this could have been an email. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow is marketed as a war novel. Even people online in book spaces talk about this novel and promote it like it's this devastating novel about the war in Syria. Moreover, the author also talked about how people often asked her what's going on in Syria, and to answer that question she wrote this novel. This was also the reason why I picked this book up in the first place. And well, that was a big fucking lie. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow is a romance novel. Yes, you heard that right. However, unlike Alone with You in the Ether, this one does not state it on the cover that this is a love story. The aforementioned plot runs out pretty quickly and goes into the background just as soon as the love interest Kanan is introduced in the novel.
Anyway, here's some dick.
Selma manages to form an escape plan for herself and her sister-in-law, but it's mostly overshadowed by the romance in the novel. Every now and then the war comes to the foreground and quickly returns to the dark. The dominant plot of romance in this novel makes it really difficult to take anything else seriously. And since the war is not discussed with the political and military imbalance in Syria, it serves no other purpose in the book apart from just being there. Occasional shooting and bombings are there in the novel, but it's mostly just there to chunk up the novel and often feels repetitive. And mind you, the romance in the novel is not even well written. Nothing infuriates me more than quote-unquote halal romance. To put it simply, it's the Islamic equivalent of Christian romance, and I need to talk about the lack of research when it comes to these two novels. When speaking of these two novels, I really can't pinpoint which one lacks more in research. Honestly, it's a tight race, and yes, even if you've had some lived experiences, you still need to do a little bit of research, just a little, for the sake of consistency, accuracy, and the reader's suspension of disbelief. Lived experience doesn't cancel out the responsibility of portraying things responsibly, especially when you're writing about mental illness, war, or grief. This isn't fanfiction anymore, besties. There are stakes now. Let's talk about Alone with You in the Ether first, which for the most part reads like a TikTok handbook of bad mental health advice. You know the type, romanticizing dysfunction, red flags treated as love letters, and trauma repackaged as aesthetic. It's giving, we need to stop normalizing therapy and start normalizing two unstable people destroying each other in vintage lighting. But here's the thing, if we rage quit the book, we're really missing something. We need to look at this book with a literate lens. See what it's trying to do beneath all the chaos. Because for all its Tumblr core writing and existential B monologues, the book positions itself as an exploration of mental health and connection. Reagan in particular seems to suffer from bipolar disorder or at least hypomania, but is never formally diagnosed in the novel. Most of the narrative follows her impulsivity, obsessive thinking, delusions of grandeur, and need for intensity. She is written to be magnetic and infuriating, deeply selfish and self-indulgent, and honestly, nice try at that. The novel clearly wants us to read Reagan as a flawed character and not as a heroine, but the line between critique and glorification gets blurry real fast when you don't have the emotional or narrative distance to handle it. Reagan isn't unlikable in a way literary fiction delights in. She's unlikable in a way where it feels like that the book is still in love with her a little too much. Obviously a self-insert, I think the author really shied away from unraveling the ugly flaws of Reagan that would have made her truly unlikable. And Aldo is written like someone who walked out of grad school fever dream and just never came back. He is emotionally unavailable but dressed it up in metaphysics. You get the sense that the author really wanted him to sound profound, but most of his dialogue sounds like he googled deep things to say at 2 a.m. while manic. It's not that the book shouldn't explore broken people falling in love, but at least it should be aware of what it costs and what it looks like. Romanticizing instability without unpacking is not the same as representing it. And while I don't expect the novel to be a PSA, I do expect nuance, especially when the prose is trying so hard to be intelligent. And I mean hard, like paragraph-long metaphors about bees hard. More on the writing style later. For now, let's get back to the terrible, absolute disaster of a novel when it comes to research, as long as the lemon trees grow. There are a lot of problems with this book, but the main one is the lack of research. Secondly, I think the book was written at a wrong time, a time when much info wasn't publicly available and the author decided to rely on whatever Western media was putting out those days. However, this book came out around 2022, and by that time there was a lot of public information available about the FSA that the book glorifies to extremely problematic levels. First of all, I've seen a huge number of Syrians talk about how the book depicts it as a revolution when in reality it's just the FSA terrorizing the locals. What the book labels as a rebellion is in fact a civil war that has claimed more than 500,000 lives. Another issue with the FSA in the novel is that the book depicts it as this revolutionary organized group when in reality FSA is composed of many subgroups and factions that operate individually, making it really difficult and problematic to talk about the group as a whole as freedom fighters. Several factions in the Free Syria Army aligned themselves with Turkey years before the book was published. And for almost a decade they have acted as proxy forces for Turkey in northeastern Syria. This region is home to diverse ethnic and religious minorities like Kurds, Yazidis, and Armenians. And it has faced ongoing violence and destabilization as a result. Yes, the author completely overlooked all of that, and the portrayal of FSA as Syria's only hope oversimplifies the brutal realities of war. It ignores the diverse voices within the country, many of whom have different perspectives on resistance, justice, and peace. By not engaging with these complexities, the novel risks reinforcing a one-sided narrative that doesn't really reflect the full spectrum of the Syrian experience. And honestly, I'm pretty sure I've spoken more on this war within this video than the author did in As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow, because in the novel, the war just goes to the background. After a few chapters of setting the scene, we meet Kenan, which in the subtext I quote, hot. That's the entire justification for Salma, the main character, to fall in love with him.
You dumb fucking bitch! I'm gonna fuck!
They meet, exchange a few words, survive exactly 0 meaningful experiences, and within a short few days, they're ready to risk it all and get married.
Bling, bling, bling. Bitches is mad.
In the middle of the war. And yes, the war is still happening, but you wouldn't know because of how it is so emotionally irrelevant in the novel by this point. The novel bends over backward, trying to keep it in the background like it's not trying to kill the romantic vibe. If you asked me to name a single flaw or remotely realistic trait that makes Kenan likable or even memorable, I wouldn't be able to. He reads less like a character and more like a Pinterest board titled War-Torn Boyfriend Aesthetic. Sold as this deep insight into the Syrian experience, this book falls flat on everything that it tries to sell. The romance is boring and there's like total of 5 things that happen over and over again. Kenan and Salma have absolutely 0 chemistry. And overall, the book just lacks in character development. For a book that is set in a war-torn country, there isn't enough action going on to push the narrative forward, and the ending leaves you deeply unsatisfied. This book is stuck on repeat like a broken Spotify loop. The same thoughts, the same actions, and no joke, the same sentences keep circling back to you like it's caught on a Groundhog Day spiral. But if you cut out Salma's internal monologue, should I stay and help Syria? Should I leave for my safety? But wait, Kenan is so hot. But also Syria? But also Kenan? You'd lose at least half of the book. At some point, it stops being character conflict and starts to sound like a Twitter thread with just 2 tweets recycled 70 different times. Just a girl standing in a war zone, asking her intrusive thoughts to chill. And look, we get it, she's torn. But if I have to read one more emotionally indecisive paragraph dressed up as internal turmoil, I might start rooting for the escape boat just out of spite. And let's talk about who can write what. This is a question that I guess is as old as literature itself. Some sort of discourse along its lines is always happening over there at Twitter. Let me clarify first that I'm not saying that people should be kept from writing whatever they want. However, this also means that what's being produced shouldn't lack in creativity and should be overall authentic. In case of Alone with You in the Ether, the novel is mostly a self-insert with the author's own lived experiences disguised as fiction. Not much going on over there, is it? Other than that, the book suffers from cringe, and you'd be reading a paragraph that starts off really well and then it just doesn't go anywhere. There are random philosophical facts dropped in the novel that are really good but make absolutely zero sense in the context of the book. It's like if Taylor Swift's discography was a novel. I bet this book goes so hard if you're stupid as fuck. This is the kind of book that should have stayed in the draft because you can genuinely tell that this is the best this book could have been and there was absolutely nothing that could be done to make it any better. And that's the reason why I rated it so high. It achieved the thing that it was trying to achieve. It nails the millennial cringe. However, we still have to talk about As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow. The author of the novel Zulfa Katu is a diaspora kid, and I kid you not, when I found that out after finishing the novel, I wasn't the least bit surprised. The entire novel feels like a story written by someone who's never been in the situation at hand.
I know a lot of things, but I don't know about that.
Sold as the Syrian experience, that is exactly what the book lacks, the Syrian experience. Reading it felt like I was constantly asking myself, when do we get to see the Syrian experience, and being constantly told that there isn't going to be any Syrian experience, you stupid slut. This book is so painfully underdescribed that this might as well have been written in invisible ink. I genuinely struggle to picture anything, the setting, the characters, even the war, and that's a huge problem, especially for the book that claims to challenge stereotypes about Syria and show it as a beautiful, complex country. But here's the thing, if you're going to portray Syria more than just rubble and headlines, you have to actually describe it. And since you've never been there and have absolutely no clue what goes on over there, I don't expect much. Give us texture, give us color, give us anything more than vague mentions of olive trees and destruction. As it stands, the setting could have been anywhere from a war-torn fantasyland to the background of a gritty CW pilot. After nearly 400 pages, if you ask me what Syria sounds like, smells like, I just have to shrug. Because the book doesn't show us what Syria looks like. It tells us that it's beautiful, but in the most passive, undercooked way possible. And that's not just lazy. That undermines the entire point. This is what happens when you write about something that you don't have the lived experience of. Alone with You in the Ether is a terrible book, but it works because there's originality in it. As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow doesn't work because its inspiration comes from Pinterest mood boards. And can we talk about the absolutely unnecessary amount of Studio Ghibli references in As Long as the Lemon Trees Grow? If I had a lemon every time somebody mentioned Studio Ghibli in this book, I'd have become Beyonce. You can tell that the author is a bigger fan of Studio Ghibli than her characters, and she's trying to fit in as many references as she possibly can. Other than that, Salma never shuts up about her hijab. Now listen, the author was born in Canada and lives in Switzerland, and I think she forgot that the Middle East doesn't see hijab the same way the West does. It's not a problem there, it's the local attire, and we don't need it pandered like the novel is set in Nazi Germany. And back to Studio Ghibli, the author didn't just stop with the references, she introduced a character named Khauf. Now, as I mentioned earlier, Khauf literally translates to fear, which, yeah, that's the level of metaphor that we're dealing with here. Subtlety? Never heard of her. Symbolism? She's on vacation.
Vintage? No. Elegance? No.
It's giving first draft. No notes, just vibes. I honestly can't believe that I spent this much time and this much brain energy on something so undercooked. So let's get into it. Who is Khauf? What is he supposed to be? According to the book, he is the physical manifestation of Salma's fear and trauma. According to me, he's a rejected character design from Inside Out who got really into villain monologues. He's written like a cartoonish bad guy. He just shows up to emotionally nag Salma like he's Regina George with a trauma degree. But here's the thing, he's supposed to be scary. He's supposed to be representing deep psychological turmoil. And yet, the way he's portrayed is so absurd, so lacking in nuance that I was just waiting for him to pull the top hat and start singing Get Ready like Scar from The Lion King. Every time he appears, it's just the copy-paste of the same dialogue.
Nothing new, nothing changed, same old shit. Same old fucking shit.
You're a coward, Salma. You'll never escape. Okay, cough. Calm down. You're not the voice in her head. You're the villain in a C-grade Disney Channel original movie. Now here's a deeper issue. This is how the novel tries to depict trauma. Not as something messy, silent, confusing, or insidious, but as this loud, campy, borderline laughable Germline who follows her around for plot convenience. The depiction is so theatrical that it undermines every attempt the book makes at emotional honesty. And then, spoiler alert, he just disappears. Poof. Gone. No real process, no reckoning, no slow healing arc. Just, I'm not afraid anymore, and bam, suddenly she's healed. I'm gonna hold your hand when I tell you this. This isn't the Polar Express. You don't get to believe hard enough to just make your trauma vanish like that. The message this sends, whether intentional or not, is that trauma is like a switch that you can turn on and off whenever you feel like it. The healing is a decision that you make in a single moment instead of a long, often brutal, non-linear journey. And quite frankly, that's not just bad writing. That's just downright harmful. This is what happens when you try to write trauma as a plot device instead of some actual human experience. When you write about mental illness without the research or the care or the willingness to sit with the discomfort. Literal fear, man. Baddie of the Year, sponsored by Hot Topic. Okay, but can we finally talk about the very large, very see-through elephant in the room, Layla? Also known as Salma's sister-in-law. You know, the character who's supposedly pregnant and in need of constant care and is the sole reason why Salma is wrestling this stay or flee dilemma. Sounds high stakes, right? Except, spoiler alert, Layla isn't real. Just kidding, because absolutely everyone saw that coming. From the first few chapters, it was painfully clear that something was off about Layla. Throughout the novel, she's only talking to Salma and she magically appears like this trauma fairy. She only exists to echo Salma's fears back to her like she's a broken Siri with PTSD. This wasn't the Sixth Sense kind of misdirection. It was giving Scooby-Doo, and not even a good episode. It's like the book just kept on nudging us with, something is off about Layla. She's only talking to Salma. Do you see it? Right? Right? Like, yes, we get it. We've been got. Please move on. Honestly, if Layla had been real the entire time, that would have been the real plot twist. And the worst part is that the book treats it like it just dropped the plot twist of the century. Like we're all going to clutch our pearls and fall to the floor and whisper, no, it can't be. When in reality, I was just sitting here thinking, finally, took you long enough. And look, hallucinations as representation of trauma can work. It has been done before. But it actually needs to build tension. It needs to make you question reality. It needs to let the reveal mean something. Here, it's just like the book was playing hide and seek with a flashlight in broad daylight. So when the big reveal drops, there are no shocks, no devastation, just a sigh of relief that we can stop pretending what was so obvious from page 30. The only real mystery was how long the book was going to drag it out before admitting what we already knew. The plot twist made the 400 pages long journey really pointless and dumb, and that's exactly what happened, because in just the remaining 2 chapters, the author puts the characters thousands of leagues away in safe zones far away from Syria. Like, OMG, I need you to be so for real right now. I think we've seen enough of this bullshit, and I mean as long as the lemon trees grow. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. And if there is anything else that I missed in these 2 books, please drop it in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts on these 2 books. Until next video, bye bye.